Just before I introduce Todd Callender and Mark Steele, they're both going to talk about how they're going to actually get into you to control, into us, I should say, to control us directly. But I'll just give you a bit of background on to Todd Callender, and I wanted to thank Scott McCulloch. He's really an extraordinary man to win those cases in America. I very much support him. Just quickly, before I go on to the introduction, I think we'll probably have to shorten our break as we're running late and we have to be out of the hall by 9:30. But we need to truncate the break, second break, because I think these speakers are so important for us. What I would say is Scott not only won the FCC case, but he also won a case in Los Angeles, which I mentioned, and he's also involved in a case where he explained to me that the local authorities out in America are selling the data, apparently. I hope I got that right. And that's why I think he's quite an extraordinary attorney. We've got Todd Callender. He's also an attorney. So if I quickly give you his resume, he is a leading US attorney who worked in the disability, health, and life insurance industry for more than 20 years and focuses on the international convergence of biomedical morbidity and mortality risks in the global legal context. Now, this is the important bit. He was the first lawyer in the US to sue the US Department of Défense, the HHS and the FDA, the famous FDA, in relation to the mandates, and as such he acquired 400,000 military clients, plaintiffs, with scores of them and others that have provided ample evidence, whistleblower evidence. Mark Steele is probably well known to many of you. He's a British engineer, inventor, and patent writer, and a weapons research scientist, an engineer with a material science background, and an inventor of the first binocular optical wave guides for weapon sight systems. An expert in infrared thermal imaging, which Aman Jabi talked about, and head-up displays. Head-up displays, if you're in a tank, you can't open the lid and see round. You have to look up at a display inside the tank. Molecular reactors, signal processing, and transducer design, all of which explains why he's an expert on the actual technicalities of the 5G spectrum. Now, in this video, which is an interview or discussion with Todd Callender and Mark Steele, I just want to run through some slides so that you can get the drift of what they're talking about, because it's quite technological. So if I can explain to you what they're doing. Now the clicker is, oh, here it is, right. And, right, so here, when we're talking about a society controlled or free, AICS, which is hosting this event, is utterly committed to freedom of expression, freedom of speech, and differing perspectives. Now, many people, including Tess Lawrie and Sandy, see this situation as a spiritual one. We're in a sort of church now where they talk about God, Satan, and the devil. I'm not that way inclined myself, but I'm absolutely hell-bent on making sure that people who want to speak like that have the freedom to do so. My approach is more philosophical, and I met many years ago a man called Krishnamurti. He had many discussions with the physicist David Bohm, and David Bohm works with Sir Roger Penrose. And these are strides in understanding the human condition and human consciousness. But I'm always happy to listen to people with different views and people who see the world in a struggle between God and Satan or the devil. So I just mentioned that because that crops up in this video. The next slide. Now this I'll read out in the video, but there are some very interesting things which crop up. Most interesting is a dear man called Dennis Meadows, who is in Sandy Adams' Club of Rome books. He wants to reduce us, 8 billion, down to 1 billion, but you will be glad to know he wants to do it nicely. So I hope you feel reassured. Unfortunately, the Grim Reaper has removed him from the earth, so that is his karma, I guess. So the next thing, I wanted to explain that the level of science that is being applied on us is Star Trek level of advancement. It's really astonishing, and we'll be able to see it in the interview, how far advanced the science is. And to understand it, we just quickly want to go in a few steps. And the other thing is, apart from the wish to reduce the human population because they think we are polluting the world by breathing, creating too much CO2 and consuming the resources, apart from reducing us from 8 billion down to 1 billion, they also want to transhumanize the remnant. And when you see the technology involved, you understand the mechanism of transhumanism. And I just want to quote these two interesting things. Forbes magazine, which is well known to us all, once connected, that's you, me, connected, data can be exchanged, and the body and device can be remotely monitored and controlled. Now, this follows on to what Scott was talking about. And then Yuval Noah Harari, who works with Klaus Schwab in the World Economic Forum, he said a new regime of surveillance took over, especially surveillance under the skin. Today we have the technology to hack humans on a massive scale. Now, you'll see later on in this discussion that the pandemic opened up the door for them to do that, and we'll understand in the interview later. I just wanted to explain something that conventional medicine doesn't speak about, and that's the quantum field. The quantum field is an invisible energy field that arranges matter in time and space. And it applies to the human being. You have what's called a morphogenetic field, which the DNA in your brain cells is an antenna for and decodes information from that natural Wi-Fi field. So all your thoughts and memories are in that field. All the mechanism for your biochemical reactions are in that field. So if you interfere with that field, you can control people's thoughts and you can control their biochemistry. The other thing I was going to say, there is a myth that microwave radiation, which is 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G, etc., is non-ionizing radiation. Well, this research document shows that it can be ionizing. And everybody knows how dangerous ionizing radiation is. This paper shows that microwave radiation can interfere with the quantum field and create ionizing effects. It's very important, in my view, to understand the fundamental difference between 2G, 3G, 4G, and 5G. 2 to 4G are all radio wave isotropic radiation. You can see when you drop a stone in a pond, the rings go out, and the further you're away from the rings, the weaker is the energy. And here, 5G is nothing like that at all. It's the collimation of those waves into beams, and those beams can travel very, very long distances at a very high power intensity. They don't obey what's called the inverse square law and drop off with distance. They are maintained at a very high energy over long distances. And they need it to scan and back all the data. You can't do that with 4G to the same extent. And so 5G is beamform columns of energy that do not obey the inverse square law, and they can back all to an AI computer, the computer that Scott and Sandy were talking about. And that computer is designed to control humanity. And Mark Steele was the first person to discover that we have a small cell 5G network through the streetlights, the LED streetlights, and you can see, bottom left-hand corner, the 5G plate lens antenna housed in the so-called photoelectric cell covering, which you can see above it, and you'll see it when you go home on most streetlights in the UK. Scott talked about tracking you inside your home. If you've got a street of these streetlights, they create a densified field. So when you walk around in your home, you create a disturbance in the field, which can be digitized. Imagine walking around in a ping-pong ball-filled room when you move around, you dislodge the ping pong balls. Same effect in microwave radiation. That's digitized and they can see you, as Scott McCulloch mentioned. What about the famous vaccines, which Andrew Bridgen is going to talk about later? This diagram shows all the components that are introduced with each inoculation. Together they act as a network for monitoring the human body. And don't forget, Harari said he wanted to go under the skin. So we're getting closer to how they want to do that. Optogenetics is an extra dimension. You've got the microwave range, and beyond that, you've got the terahertz range. That's the light range. So microwave range is used for certain backhaul, and the light range, remember Aman Jabi's infrared technology, that's in the light spectrum in the terahertz range, can be used in relation to changing our behavior. Optogenetics is the use of light. An opsin is a chemical that responds to light. So here you have a human body connected to the internet directly, not through your mobile phone. And that's called the fourth industrial revolution, or the Internet of Bodies. And this is how transhumanism comes in, which is to change the human DNA so it can be hacked and make it sensitive to light. And you can see the delivery of the opsin, optical imaging, and a light source, and the recording behavior, and the change in human behavior. And this shows you that this is not imagination, not conspiracy theory. These are patents on Google that you can see. Delivery and formulation of engineered nucleic acids. That means modification of the human DNA. This is a paper from America issued by Todd Callender detailing light-based approaches to cardiac arrhythmia research, light-based, so they can induce things with this light programming. And here, Todd Callender, you'll hear, talks about mCherry, a certain protein involved with gene modification. And just to reinforce, this is not conspiracy theory. This is the British government, UK Health Security Agency, talking about mCherry, which is what Todd is going to talk about. So I hope that will give you an insight into the video. So if we can play the video, Gary, that would be great.
Gentlemen, thank you for coming today. You're in the United Kingdom. I'm actually in the Caribbean, so we're a little bit further apart than usual. So thank you for inviting me to your roundtable session, the 5G Weaponry Roundtable. And you've got some other notable people coming. But Mark, you and I have been working together for several years now. You're an electronic warfare expert that I've relied upon heavily in our discussions about 5G and warning people about the interplay between electromagnetic radiation, amongst other things, and the shots, the many attacks on humanity. And you've introduced me to Nick Martin, who I'm grateful to understand and know. But I'd love for you all to introduce yourselves, and for those people who don't yet know you, a little bit of background, why we're here and what it is you want to share. Bear in mind that I have just spent a little bit of time in my monologue talking about optogenetics that has to do with a glycoprotein called mCherry, where parts of our bodies can be turned on and off with light switches, exposure to light. Mark, you must know a lot about this, but also the ability to utilize these opsins to affect our behavior. It's not just turning our bodies on and off, but they can actually wire our brains to do whatever it is we want to do. And I think you guys might be the experts in this. So with that said, welcome.
Well, thanks very much, Todd. What I was going to say is that we know that the World Economic Forum is very much interlinked with the United Nations, and they both have agendas which are very, very similar. And if I quote from a summary by Forbes magazine of what the World Economic Forum wants to do, they say when the Internet of Things connects with your body, the result is the Internet of Bodies. The Internet of Bodies is an extension of the Internet of Things and basically connects the human body to a network through devices that are ingested, implanted, or connected to the body in some way. Once connected, data can be exchanged and the body and device can be remotely monitored and controlled. That's a summary of what's called the fourth industrial revolution, or the Internet of Bodies. Now, Dennis Meadows, he co-wrote a book called The Limits to Growth, which is connected through the Club of Rome to the United Nations. And Dennis Meadows, you can look him up on YouTube, wants to reduce the human population from around about 7 or 8 billion down to 1 billion. And he says he wants to do it nicely. And then finally, Yuval Noah Harari, who works with Klaus Schwab in the World Economic Forum, says free will is over. Imagine an algorithm that will tell a teenager where he is on the gay-straight spectrum. Today we have technology to hack humans on a massive scale. People could look back in 100 years and identify the coronavirus pandemic as the moment when a new regime of surveillance took over, especially surveillance under your skin. So really what I was thinking, Todd, and Mark, your work and Todd's is very, very interlinked, is that if it's possible, Todd, for you to explain to us, and so that we can get it over, because the BBC won't tell our British population how they're actually going to bring about their agenda and what are the mechanisms involved. And when you speak about the opsins and the light technology, if we can get that over to the people, and that will tie in with what Mark has been talking about, which is something I don't know whether you're aware of in America. We have in the UK, city of London, obviously everybody knows London, and they put up cameras in what's called the ultra low emission zone. And these cameras work on infrared, and Mark has discovered a great deal about those cameras, which feeds very nicely into what you're saying. There we are, that's the camera.
Wow.
So I wondered, Todd, whether you could explain in summary about what you've discovered about the way the light frequencies can control humanity, and that would be a vehicle for Mark to explain the detail about the ULEZ cameras. Would that be?
Yeah. Well, I can to some extent. We've got a lot of scientific papers that date back to the last decade. The one I first brought up in the monologue, it talks about the genetically engineered magnetoprotein that remotely controls human behavior. And there was a video clip we played at the very beginning with a lady from the World Economic Forum. Thank you very much, Melissa. Whereby these opsins react to different frequencies. So Mark has done a great job of explaining over the years how EMF radiation in the megahertz, kilohertz, gigahertz ranges, right? Those are just frequencies, have different effects on the human body and even human behavior. And now what's happened is they've moved into the terahertz range. That's really more towards light range. And one of the things that we came to find as it relates to people that received the shots is included in that shot, we found cesium-137. And cesium-137 is a radioactive material. It's what the world's atomic clock uses to keep time. It also, when binds with living tissue, it turns that tissue into a transducer, a transmitter, a receiver, and an amplifier. An amplifier is key here. Why? Because a gigahertz inbound signal turns into a terahertz outbound signal. In other words, they're able to amplify the signal, not just in terms of the strength of the signal, but also the frequency itself. And this is the range the opsins are interacting with. They're different frequencies of light. Different colors of light are different frequencies. And so the body reacts differently, whether it's your brain or whether it's your heart tissue or other parts of your body, depending on what opsin is used and where it is put. So now what we're seeing is the migration past the 5G network, fifth generation, into what some people are calling 6G, 7G. Those are just generations and different types of ranges, frequencies used. And that's where Mark's world and my world seem to intersect. I hope that made sense to you.
Yes, I mean, that's absolutely marvelous, Todd. And Mark speaks a lot about spectrum dominance, whereby it includes the microwave spectrum and the terahertz range. Yes. And Mark says it's all basically 5G, that is collimated signals, scanning and backhauling data. So over to you, Mark.
Well, just to clarify, 5G is anything that can either collimate, cohere, send frequency in a directional beam at your target. So those terahertz range emissions, if they're focused as they are with these low emission zone ULEZ cameras, what was quite interesting about that particular design, I think if we can throw it back up, Todd, and then I can explain through it what its real purpose, if we can get that picture back up. We'll have a multi-photon. If you look at the meat and potatoes part of this, so the basically the hardware, it's got a lot of capacitance. I've actually seen inside one of these weapons. It's got a large cooler vent system, so they're expecting to put a lot of heat within that system. Those LEDs on the front, there's like a small set of LEDs. That's basically an array. Now that can cause offset interference signals, which cause phasing, which cause a phaser effect, as we saw with, on Star Trek, etc. So you can cause a phaser type effect. Now, the power output from those bright LEDs, they can affect, because obviously this operates in the infrared part of the spectrum, so it's non-visible to the eye. The eye can't see it. It can actually interrogate the human body. It can basically strip off the clothing and it can look to a depth within the cardiovascular system. Once you get inside that cardiovascular system, we know that people have been injected with these nanoparticulates, and the upconversion, these are lanthanide coated nanoparticulates, and exactly what you said before, Todd. These change the frequency as the IR frequency hits them. They can either up convert or you can have down convert nanoparticulates. These are weapon systems. The capacitance inside that product, because I've actually had a good look inside. I saw one in London. Fortunately, some chaps down there, local heroes, have been removing quite a few of them. As fast as London Transport for London can put them up, they're getting removed as quickly as they possibly can.
Amazing.
And we've actually had a look inside that particular piece of weaponry. It is extremely dangerous, has massive capacitance, so it can actually pump out a very high powered emission through those light emitting diodes. Those diodes are antennas. They're single elements in a large array, and the interference pattern that can cause phasing and phased array, but where it's extremely dangerous, it's operating the non-visible spectrum, you can't see it. Significant number of people will have issues, serious health problems. This is without it actually being weaponized, just the whole point of it actually being there. It causes cornea damage, where you get cataracts. A lot of people who suffer pulse modulated issues, where you get flicker from some computer games, they will have potential fits. So where you hear a lot of scientists who talk about, control, bioinformatics and biologically inspired operating systems, because that's what these are.
I want people to think really carefully about what it was that Mark just said. Is there any part of what it is we just saw in this apparatus? Is there any part to the options that can actually be used for our benefit, and why would they do it for our benefit, given everything that we know about the attacks that we're suffering? In the case of the United States, the border is not only open, but metric tons of fentanyl are flowing across our border. We are losing more people per year from fentanyl than we did in the entirety of the Vietnam War every year. So this is the point. If this was for our own good, we wouldn't be seeing any of these other things to go with it. We wouldn't have people hiding what it is they're doing. And you're absolutely right, Mark. I'm really pleased that you said it. The people behind this, if we can call them people, they feed on fear, they feed on hatred, they feed on division, and that's how they've kept us controlled for millennia. And the more that we grow closer to God, the more we grow closer with each other and find joy in our lives, the less powerful they are. So this is all in furtherance of humanity's survival. And so that's why I'm happy to be here. And Nick, thank you for putting this on and letting us expose this to folks.
Very good. I mean, what I would say, Todd, is that it's quite a shock for most people to believe that, first of all, this technology exists. I mean, it's like Star Trek technology, but you've gone through
Sure.
the details. You've gone through the details on how they can switch off human consciousness or switch off parts of the body. That's one thing, which is a big jump for many people to understand. The second jump is that there are people, what Mark calls of a satanic nature, who are interested in changing, in fact, exterminating humanity as we know it now. In other words, they either kill swathes of the population off, or the remnant is completely transhumanized into
Yes.
a mechanical setup,
Well,
which is no longer human.
Let me just add to this. We don't have to guess if that's the intent. In Cairo, Egypt in 1994, the world, or the nations of this world, got together in Cairo, Egypt, and they decided 7 billion people had to go. They wrote this down, Nick. It's not even a secret. There is now a population division of the United Nations, as is there in the United States, Health and Human Services. I'm sure there is in the United Kingdom. Yep. Depopulation is one of their stated agendas. Why are we not taking them at their word?
I agree, and particularly when you have people like Dennis Meadows, who wrote that, co-wrote that book, speaking about reducing the human population down from 8 or 7 billion down to 1 billion, and it's on YouTube. Anybody can have a look at it. But it's so, as they say, in your face, in plain sight, that it's beyond most people's normal life. I mean, if you're taking your children to school, you take them to the doctors for whatever they need to, and then you work hard. These things, like what Mark talks about, satanic nature, and what you're explaining, this very, very advanced science, are so far beyond most people's normality, it's difficult to convey it in a way that people can readily understand it. Would you agree with that, John?
Absolutely. And it shouldn't be. I mean, it's shocking because we've been led down this road of believing things are easy, right? We've been entertained, breaded, and circused to death. And we're missing what's happening around us because we're so focused on what's happening in our immediate lives. And there are no standards. There are no principles. Anything goes. You're absolutely right.
So, Mark, I don't know what you feel. I remember attending a talk, Mark, of yours in Wimbledon, London, many years ago, and you asked the audience, do you trust the government? And the audience burst out in laughter. I don't know whether you remember that.
Yes, I do remember it. Yeah, it was quite an interesting assessment of the once people actually avail themselves of the technicalities, the equipment that's been deployed on top of them, then it's pretty obvious that there are actors within government through their net zero climate hoax are planning the mass extinction. Just this afternoon, I've been to a court case where we had two chaps who'd been arrested for an affray, and the Crown Prosecution Service don't want to play. And they don't want to play because, unfortunately, we have the prima facie evidence of a mass genocide agenda that's staring us in the face. They don't want to see that in a court.
Todd is quite right. They are quite open about it. You've got Dennis Meadows. And what was the Cairo conference, Todd? If we can just expand on that you were talking about,
sure,
so that people can understand about it.
It was, in fact, population control. It was the population accords in Cairo, Egypt, 1994, as a UN convention. And out of that flowed a population division of the United Nations dedicated to that. And in addition to that, it became US policy, national security policy. The United States was officially in a population freeze, that we weren't going to encourage population growth anymore. You would have seen China adopted the one-child policy. All of that actually flowed, including the 1994 Cairo Population Accords, from a paper written by one Henry Kissinger in 1974, where he actually laid out the reasons and rationale therefore. Effectively, they said that the world was overpopulated now, it was going to become uncontrollably so, and that resources would dry up and that we would all die these horrible deaths. From that came 1992, the Rio Climate Accords, which was used as a means of creating a causal relationship between humans and the destruction of the earth. So the anthropomorphism, whereby any and all human behavior is detrimental to the earth, and therefore we better get that, that one number down to zero, as Bill Gates said it. They're effectively blaming everything climate change oriented on human behavior as an excuse to say we need to eliminate humans. So all of that came from Henry Kissinger's paper in 1974. It became official dogma of the United States post 1994 and of the United Nations in 1994.
So, Todd and Mark, would you say that 5G there is being put there to implement this depopulation agenda? Would you say that's really what 5G is all about?
Absolutely.
In part.
Absolutely.
The other part of it is what Mark said, is that these people don't do these things in a vacuum. They're also harvesting along the way, whether it's harvesting, anger or sadness or fear. That is all true. But they're actually also harvesting our body biorhythms, our energy itself, through the wireless body area network. If you can imagine, that's actually happening right this very moment, Nicholas. There's a fairly famous patent. It's 2020, because it's granted in 2020, 060606, from the issue from the World Patent Office. Is owned by, guess what, Microsoft, otherwise known as Bill Gates. In that, he reserves unto himself the ability to transform humans into cloud computing nodes, batteries, and power sources. In 2020, this is what he said, post-injections, 2021, guess what? People that got the shots are now discoverable. Their wireless body area networks are not only discoverable, but they're harvestable. And you don't have to believe me. You can see it in action right now. If you go to a website, inpersona.com, INPERSONA.com. They will, right this very moment, you can download a Fitbit or an app to your iPhone, and they will harvest your heartbeat and mine cryptocurrency with it. In other words, it's already here. It's already happened, Nicholas. This is not speculation. It's done. They're already harvesting people's biorhythms, their energy. They're using their brains and their bodies as cloud computing nodes through the 5G system. That's why I made reference to the cesium-137, a necessary component. And by the way, the WHO has been monitoring the specific absorption rate of humans across this world since when? Before 1994. That is, in fact, the radiological effect on how much radioactive material we have in our bodies. It's all been coordinated. It's all used. It's all dual use, as a matter of fact.
So, Todd, in summary, for some people won't be able to understand the satanic or accept this satanic approach, but for those people who can't or won't accept it, and they can refer to what you just said, which is part of the transhumanistic agenda.
Look it up.
Exactly, harvest people's energy for generating things like Bitcoin and that sort of thing. So either way, humanity will be changed or exterminated. And what we could say is none of this can occur without the spectrum dominance in the terahertz and the microwave range of 5G. And once we can communicate that to people, it'll be like two scandals in England, or in Britain, I should say. One was Prince Andrew's connection with Epstein. As soon as people knew that, he was removed by public awareness from his position as an effective person in the royal family. And secondly, we had what's called the post office scandal, which terrible things happened to people who are running post offices. That was unearthed by Andrew Bridgen many years ago, but nothing happened. But once the public were aware, really dramatic things happened, and the scandal was sorted out and is in the process of being sorted out. I think if we can convey what you and Mark have just said to the British public through or the world's public through what we're doing, then 5G, either in the terahertz range, the light range, or in the microwave range, is finished, because it can only go on behind people's backs. When that is going on in front of their eyes, the whole thing is over. Wouldn't you agree with that?
I love that. Let's look at this also just from a cost-benefit analysis. Now we find 5G masts everywhere. What Mark said is right. These are phased arrays. They're tracking your phone for sure. We don't have to guess that. Wuhan became the first 5G city Halloween night 2019. The next day people start falling over dead. And by the way, the next month, 21 million actually ditched their 5G. My point is this. What benefit are you getting from the 5G? Are you actually getting faster service, better packets, uploads? And the answer to the question is no, you're not. It is absolutely not any faster, any better. There is no better service with 5G.
Absolutely. And if we can get that over through what we're doing tonight, then the world will change. Because once people understand it, then things change, like they did in Prince Andrew's case, like they did in the post office case.
Yes.
Just
test it for
one thing.
yourselves.
There's one thing I would like to add. The power energy levels, the man-made power energy levels are significantly higher and more problematic to the electromagnetic radiation fields of a biological human structure. So consequently, what you will see from this pollution, what you'll actually see, a corrupted, let's say a GMO type of signal system, people will not be able to be what Bill Gates wants them to be and generate this cryptocurrency on the back of activity. The people will die.
Yes, and worse than that, actually, in so much that the genetic modification features of what it is they've implanted in people are, number one, contagious, and number two, they're replicatable. It means that they're passed on to future generations. The goal of their enterprise is to genetically modify every plant and animal species on this planet. Humanity will be extinct either by death or by genetic modification, but Homo sapiens sapien will no longer exist.
Todd, that's a point that I forgot to mention, and I'm glad you mentioned it. Could you just, before we finish, explain the significance of your court case? What's the case,
Sure.
the law stands at the moment, and how you want to change it for the betterment of humanity?
Yeah, thank you for that. So I sued the US Department of Defense in August of 2021 in an attempt to stop two things. Number one, Secretary Austin had authorized the use of force, meaning holding people down in the military to give them the shots. And number two, the actual compulsory taking of these COVID shots. And so I sued them to try and stop that. We filed what's called a temporary restraining order. And through the course of 3 and some years, I went all the way to the Supreme Court. In the process, we discovered that the regulatory regime was not the FDA investigative new drug process. It was a biological application separately regulated because these were gene modification agents. That led us to a case in 2013. The Supreme Court ruled. It's called molecular pathology versus myriad genetics. And in that case, they hold on page 6, halfway down, starting with the words, it is also use of mRNA, right? This is Pfizer Moderna, use of mRNA to effectuate gene modification, or gene therapy sometimes it's called, means that the synthetic product thereof belongs to the patent holders. That's the holding of that case. What I'm saying to you is that people that got the mRNA shots were genetically modified such that they are now the intellectual property, the chattel property of the patent holders. In this particular case, that's the US Department of Defense. In other words, they've created a new slave species. And I went to the Supreme Court and the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals, and I said, listen, in 1865, we outlawed owning people. That's called slavery. And so I asked the court to reverse their decision in molecular pathology versus myriad genetics. And the US Supreme Court, in a 5-4 decision, said, no, we're not going to hear your case. No, we're not going to reverse our holding. In other words, the state of law in the United States right now, I assume the world, is the people that got the shots, at least the mRNA shots, are now the chattel property of the US Department of Defense.
Finally, you've tabled a case to reverse that decision with the Supreme Court, and it's been accepted, hasn't it, Todd?
It got accepted for consideration by the US Supreme Court in a 5-4 decision. They refused to hear it and refused to upset their holding. So what I'm saying to you is that there's a couple billion people that are now owned by the US Department of Defense. Let me put it to you this way, Nicholas. If you had a dog and you shot the dog in the head and killed it, would you be convicted of homicide? Would you be guilty of homicide? The answer is no. Your dog is not a Homo sapien. Homicide is the unlawful taking of a human life defined as Homo sapiens. If, however, a person is genetically modified, they are no longer Homo sapiens. Then, if you shot that person, would you be guilty of homicide? And the answer is no. because you didn't kill a human defined as Homo sapiens. You have killed a Homo borgenesis, according to the names provided by my government. The NASA Langley research paper in 2001 named this new species Borg, B-O-R-G. Why? There's Borg particles in the shots. There is Borg quantum physics. All of this was planned out a long time ago. The ownership of people was contemplated by your government, the Ministry of Defense, along with the Ministry of Defense in Germany, in a paper called Human Augmentation. At page 67, they get around to wondering, hey, I wonder if we should think about ethics and legality. After they've already genetically modified people, only now are they wondering if those people have rights, wondering if those people are owed some kind of a legal duty. It's already been done. The question is, are we going to stand for it?
Many thanks. I think the answer is we won't stand for it. I'm extremely optimistic for humanity. Of course, I don't know, but I feel that humanity will be able to push back on all of this, and that we'll regain a much more healthy psychologically and physical approach.
All of this control over humanity depends on those very same frequencies. It depends on that 5G network. The timing of cesium-137 in the people to the cesium-137 in the 5G network. Without that, humanity, I think, has a really good chance. And 5G is doing nothing to benefit us. Nothing, nothing, nothing.